Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we're going to do another Lord of the Rings live stream. It's been a little while since we've done one of them, and we are going to be looking at Orthanc, which is just here behind me. As always, I will start with a little bit of an introduction to the topic, just talking our way through the background, the history of what this place is. Then I've got a whole load of questions from my patrons that we'll be working our way through. I will try and pick up as much as we can in the chat as we go. So let's kind of start with without any further ado, really, just with a little bit of making sure we're talking about the same things. So we've got Orthanc and we've got Isengard, and Orthanc is just this tower here, the tower in the middle. Isengard is the much bigger structure, the big ring around there, and then the whole area surrounding it. So that's when we're talking about Orthanc. It's just the tower. Isengard is the broader structure. Orthanc itself is one of Middle-earth's great mysteries because although we know quite a bit about it, we don't know exactly who built it. We don't know exactly when it was built, and we don't know exactly why it was built. We get a number of great descriptions. I've got one that I can just read out to you. It says, "There stood a tower of marvellous shape. It was fashioned by the builders of old, who smoothed the ring of Isengard, and yet it seemed a thing not made by the craft of men, but riven from the bones of the earth in the ancient torment of the hills," which is typical wonderful Tolkien writing. We don't know exactly who built it, but it was the Númenóreans, or the descendants of the Númenóreans. We don't know exactly when, but it will have been either the end of the Second Age or possibly at the very beginning of the Third Age. And we don't know exactly why, but we can kind of speculate that this is in a very strategically important position. We'll come back to this, I'm sure, several times. But if you're imagining your map of Middle-earth, you've got the Misty Mountains, which form a range going north-south, dividing the continent. Then you get a gap, and then you get the White Mountains underneath that, which go down pretty much down to the southern coast. Which means that the only way through east to west for hundreds of miles, unless you're wanting to go through the kind of treacherous mountain passes or down through Moria, is that gap that we know as the Gap of Rohan. It wasn't always called that. But the River Isen flows through there, and so Isengard is literally, this is guarding that river. And so Orthanc as a tower, it just seems to be put there in a strategically important position to be kind of guarding that way through. And when it was built, probably was when we're starting to look at the start of the two kingdoms, the successor kingdoms to Númenor. Númenor near the end of the Second Age, not at the very end of the Second Age, near the end of the Second Age, Númenor was destroyed, washed away, sunk down beneath the waves. But from that emerged these two kingdoms, Gondor in the south, Arnor in the north. And the main way of connecting those two was through what we think of now as the Gap of Rohan. So it makes absolute sense that this was Númenóreans who had escaped with Elendil, Isildur, and the rest of them. And they're just securing that main route from the Northern Kingdom to the Southern Kingdom. What we now know as the North-South Road, or sometimes called the Greenway, heads through that gap. So this is establishing a central point that can be in a strategic defensive position. So that's what it was. It was built alongside, the tower was built alongside this wider defensive structure. We've got this ring, it's called the Ring of Isengard, which is a massive circle, huge wall, very thick, very high, just one entrance into it. And that, when I say it's very thick, you're going through a tunnel to get through this wall. And then inside it is this plane, effectively, which is from edge to edge, a diameter of about a mile, 1.5-ish kilometers. So it's quite large. And in the center of that is the Tower of Orthanc. Now, Orthanc, although all of it, the ring fortification and the tower in the very middle is built from black stone, as far as we can tell, the town of Orthanc seems different, and as if there's some great power behind this. It is made up of four what are sort of basically called multi-faced columns, which stretch out, seem to come up out of the earth and stretch high up into the sky. And at the very top, they kind of capture this quite well, I think, in the films. If you imagine it, the four columns kind of like come out like this, leaving this flat area on the top, which has got lots of ancient runic carvings on there that even Gandalf seems not to be able to understand. The strange symbols, I think he calls them. Now, this was used not just as a defensive structure, but it was also used as one of the places where the new kingdoms kept a Palantir. There were 7 Palantiri that they brought across from Numenor. The southern kingdom, the northern kingdom had 3, the southern kingdom had 4. The main one of the southern kingdom was in Osgiliath, then the 2 towers on either sides, Minas Anor, Minas Ithil, they had one each, and then you had one in Orthanc. Now, that remained there pretty much throughout, from that moment on, all the way through the Third Age. And it seems that this area, although it was very much a part of Gondor, it was not a very well populated area ever. They had a garrison there in charge of Orthanc, in charge of Isengard, but this wasn't a hugely well populated area. And then over time, if you know your sort of history, the kingdom in the north, Arnor, that got attacked and divided and eventually defeated. In the south, Gondor also, although expanded out and gained great power and was very strong, slowly it started to be whittled down as well. And in the year 1600, I scribble this one down because I wouldn't remember it otherwise, 1636, there was what was known as the Great Plague, which wiped out huge amounts of people across Middle-earth. And this part of the world, around what we now think of as Rohan, though it wasn't Rohan at the time, that got hugely depopulated. To the extent that in Gondor, they kind of retreated back from there. Although they claimed all the land there, they sort of like pulled back and sort of kind of left that bit alone. And it's a little bit vague about what happens with Orthanc itself. The area more broadly was abandoned. The keys to Orthanc were taken to Minas Tirith. Now, the keys, Tolkien doesn't sort of unpack this, but the keys to Orthanc are given quite great significance, it has to be said. It's not just like here's some keys to open the front door kind of thing. The implication is the handing of the keys over to somebody symbolizes ownership. Perhaps you could only get in using those keys. So the keys went to Minas Tirith. By around the year 2500, 2510, that is when it is given, the whole area is given to Rohan, the new kingdom of Rohan. Gondor, however, kept control of Orthanc. during this time, and they had a garrison in place there, which had it was a small garrison, but it had a hereditary captain. So this was like a title passed down. It was like a mini lord, effectively, just over that small area, and the title was passed down generation to generation, captain of sort of Orthanc. But over time, Gondor, understandably, they're now cut off from this, or they don't no longer even claim the lands around this. It kind of goes out of the minds of the Gondorians. Other things are happening at home as well. That they stop thinking about this, and in particular, at some point during this long period, the kind of memory of there being a Palantir had gone, and this wasn't perhaps a huge surprise, because actually the use of the Palantirs will have the Palantiri, I should say, will have waned over time, because the ones up in the north were lost, save one which could only look west and so couldn't really be used for communication. The one in Minas Ithil was lost to Sauron. The one in Osgiliath was washed out away down into the depths of the Anduin. That left just the one in Minas Tirith. So actually, the amount of these Palantiri was hugely curtailed from the height of what it was. And this idea that you could use this as a kind of like a network, a communication network across Gondor, had fallen away. And over time, that small garrison with the hereditary captain, they probably started to feel a little bit abandoned by Gondor. And they started, as far as we can tell, the captaincy fell into, maybe the line ended or something like that. The garrison there started into marrying with some of the locals. The locals, though, were the Dunlendings over from the west side of the Misty Mountains. And the whole area within Isengard started to be taken over by the Dunlendings. At which point we start heading into the period, if you know it, you may have even seen the film from last year before, whenever it was, the War of the Rohirrim. This is when the Dunlendings attack Rohan. And we get Helm Hammerhand there at Helm's Deep. It wasn't called Helm's Deep until after that, obviously. But you got this great battle, a defensive battle, and the Gondorians eventually come in and help, and the Dunlendings get pushed back. But there was a long winter, populations again plummeting. Lots of people died in the war, and it's Rohan survived, but obviously they're a little bit, uncertain. Are Dunlendings going to come back again? The Gondorians at the time, yes, they came to the aid of their great allies, but they have to be looking more and more to the east, because at this point, then we're starting to get the Witch King operating down in Mordor. Mordor is no longer empty. They've had to be taking a step back there. At which point, Saruman appears and says, well, if you give me the keys, I could take over Orthanc. And I've got a question in a moment about why they might have said yes, but they did. And he took up residence there. So in terms of what he was up to, he largely then kept to himself. And we next kind of hear about what was going on is that after the last White Council meeting, which is the one which led to heading to Dol Guldur and kicking Sauron out of there, the one that was sort of in the part of the story of the Hobbit, after that, he returned back to Orthanc, and we're told that he fortified Isengard. Now, Isengard was already pretty fortified, but he seemed to have put more effort into it there. He didn't come out again. People kind of left him alone. And he seems to slowly have been building up his army. He seems to have been doing this kind of industrialization that's there in secret. Nobody really knew what was going on. Don't forget, massive high wall, ring wall. Nobody can see inside. Nobody can come inside unless he tells them, unless he allows them. So after that, he then about the year 3000, he starts using the Palantir, which he discovers when he's there. But everyone else seems to have forgotten it was there. He suspected it was there. He finds it around the year 3000. He starts using it, and that's how he kind of falls under the influence of Sauron through that. Now, I won't go through all of the details of the Lord of the Rings story. You know it well, but he obviously then summons Gandalf. Before the main action, he summons Gandalf to him there and imprisons him. And then, through a whole load of story, after his eventual defeat, and as part of it, the Ents come in and break down Isengard. But they cannot do damage to the Tower of Orthanc. Which is interesting, because when you start reading between the lines, even Gandalf, when he goes there after that, he doesn't try and force his way in. He doesn't try and attack it. He doesn't try and do anything. He just tries to persuade Sauron to come down and then leave it. That does not work. And eventually he kind of like holds up his hands and says, okay, I'm going to leave you under house arrest. Treebeard here, he can be looking after you. Now, obviously Treebeard did for a bit, but then allowed Saruman to leave. After the war, so Orthanc and Isengard were Aragorn. First of all, he sent some people. He and Gimli went along among others, and properly explored Orthanc, dug out all of its secrets, found out all of the things that Saruman had been doing all this time. And then after that, he took Isengard back in as part of his reunited kingdom of Gondor and Arnor. So that's where it ended. The last bit that we know about it, other than the fact that the wider area, just a bit further out from there, he gave over to the Ents. The Ents had self-governance there. Aragorn actually did this quite a bit. The Druedain, the hobbits up in the Shire, here with the Ents, giving people self-rule. And so he gave over a whole load of land to them. Obviously, Rohan carried on there as well. And that's where we leave it. The Tower of Orthanc survived all the way through the Third Age, pretty much unharmed. And I'll come back to where I started with this, which is that it's a bit of a mystery. We can understand strategically why it's there, and we can understand why people like Saruman might want to be there, why the Gondorians might want it. We kind of understand that the Númenóreans, with their magical technology, they built it. But how can it survive all that way through? How can it be so strong that the Ents, Gandalf, no one seems to be able to do any damage to it at all? It is a mystery. What are those strange symbols at the top? If even Gandalf seems to think that they're a bit odd, then they probably are. So Tolkien likes keeping some things a mystery in his world. He doesn't want everything to be explained. I think that's pretty apparent. Just think about Tom Bombadil. He doesn't want to explain things fully. He likes this idea, in particular, connected in with Númenor. With Númenor, the whole idea was that this was this great empire of humanity at its greatest and most powerful, with huge amounts of knowledge and lore and wisdom, many bad things as well. But after it went, all of that lore and knowledge was lost. We can still see bits of it just dotted around here and there. But how you would do that, that has been lost. Commander Ray, a member here for 28 months, it says. Thank you very much. If you, I'll do this one early. If you wish to support this channel, thank you so much. I hugely appreciate it. The best way is and will remain for the foreseeable future over on Patreon. That's the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. But if for whatever reason you do not wish to do so, you can be a channel member here. There's probably a button somewhere that you can click, and that will highlight your comments and things like that. So Commander Ray saying, if you want to adopt a wizard, give him a tower, he'll never leave. Also, love the focus streams. Would love to see chapter analysis streams eventually. A chapter analysis, yeah, I don't know whether I'll do chapter analysis streams. If you're talking chapter analysis of say A Song of Ice and Fire or Lord of the Rings, that would take a very long time. But I have thought about doing chapter analysis stuff. It's a thought in the back of my head. Thank you. But yeah, absolutely. So this is, it's almost an archetypal Wizard's Tower, this one. And there was a question from Roman Lakevets saying, do you think that Orthanc's unbreakable stone was made by magic or advanced engineering? Both, I would say. So Tolkien, we say this all the time. I will say this several more times in the stream, I'm sure. Tolkien has what we might call a soft magic system. He doesn't like explaining all of the details of this. And one of the things that it seems very clear is that there are, I tend to use the phrase magical technology. There are some things which are clearly human-made creations, but they're also magical in some way. And the elves would sort of often say, you know, it's not actually magic, it's just, you know, part of nature of how we are and things like that. So you get things like the Palantir are probably another example of this, is that they are these fantastic seeing stones, but they were crafted. It's not just that they, as far as we can tell, it's not just that they came out of nowhere. They were crafted and sort of magic was imbued into that creation. So Tolkien doesn't see this huge sort of division between the technology and the magic. He probably wouldn't use the word technology, though. He wasn't a massive technology fan, it has to be said. But in terms of crafting, that's probably a word he would use, and magic, yeah, he saw them kind of flowing together really well. And when you, I mean, I'll go back to that description that we got earlier. It says it seemed a thing not made by the craft of men, but riven from the bones of the earth in the ancient torment of the hills. So he says it was fashioned by the builders of old, and yet it didn't seem to be something made by the craft of men, but something coming out from nature itself. And so that's the kind of way that he would see this interaction operate, is that this is working with the world. So I mean, I don't think this is how it happened, but the way that it's kind of described is almost as if it kind of erupts out of the earth in this kind of great magical stone-like edifice just thrusting up. So it was like that's the kind of feel we've got. So is it magic or advanced engineering? Both, I would argue. Let's go to a question from A.D. Ross saying, greetings, Sir Robert, and to you too. Hope you and Dan are well. With regard to, we are, thank you. With regard to Orthanc, I'm curious whether Saruman, prior to the public reveal of his fall, had much contact with Gondor after taking up residence at Isengard, or had the Gondorians completely pulled away from that far north and west, leaving Orthanc solely within Rohan's sphere? I'm also curious, pre-Saruman, if we know anything about the Gondorian presence there in the late Second and early Third Ages when Gondor was at its height. So on that second bit, I sort of covered that in the introduction, but at a very high level, when this was set up, as far as we can tell, it was a serious fortification which housed the Palantir. And so they kept a garrison there, and in the surrounding areas, that's where the new Gondorians lived. It was quite sparsely populated, but that's where they were. And so over time, that just kind of dwindled. Now, as for whether Saruman had any contact with Gondor after taking up residence, I think the answer is no. I mentioned the keys that Tolkien seems to place a lot of weight on. One of the things is that Minas Tirith handed the keys over to him. So they're symbolically giving him access to it, but also it's them sort of washing their hands of it. It's no longer theirs. Don't forget, geographically, it is actually a long way away, the other side of Rohan. So it's not actually, it doesn't make any sense. If they've forgotten about there being a Palantir there, then actually it doesn't really make any sense, because Gondor is their northwest flank is being protected by Rohan. Rohan's northwest flank is now being protected by Saruman. Why does Gondor even need to have a presence there? You can certainly imagine their thinking, and their thinking in terms of where they should be focusing is east towards Mordor. So they had no reason to be staying in contact there. And the Saruman had no particular interest. He was wanting to be doing his own secret things. He had no particular interest in keeping up a conversation with Gondor. So I think the short answer is no. There will have been some contact with Rohan, of course, because Rohan bordered it, but that's it. Elspeta M saying, good evening, Robert and Dan the dog. Hope you're having a lovely spring. I am. The items found in Saruman's secret closet include Isildur's armor, the Elendilmere, some military supply bag, and a small metal case on a chain, presumably to hold the One Ring in containment rather than wearing it openly on a chain around his neck. But no human remains. Do you believe that a non-evil Saruman provided proper burial for Isildur, or that a fallen Saruman threw the bones to the orcs and walks? This is a good question. To provide the context, I said that after the War of the Ring, Aragorn kind of sent a small team there to investigate what had Saruman been up to all that time. And they go, and Gimli is there, and he uses all of his kind of dwarfy skills, kind of knocking on things and experimenting stuff. And he found a secret room, basically, a secret sort of cupboard. And in that was the Elendilmere, which was this kind of fillet with these two great, beautiful jewels on, that had belonged to Elendil, and Isildur had them, and they were symbols of kinghood. So Aragorn took them. Also, there was this casket. A small, when it's casket, we're not talking about massive casket, this small casket that seems to have been worn on a chain around the neck. So this was what Isildur seems to have done, is that he didn't just have the chain in his pocket, or even as Frodo did, on a chain around his neck. He did, but he had it within this kind of small locket, basically. So they found them. They also found a few other trinkets and things that he'd picked up, stuff from Eorl, the sort of founder of Rohan. But you get in Unfinished Tales, which is fantastic. If you've never read the wider Tolkien stuff, outside of The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, I would personally recommend Unfinished Tales. Is very accessible. It's got basically just a whole series of these chapters with different focuses, just interesting topics where you get what Tolkien wrote about different things. So you've got one on the history of Galadriel, for example. Another one setting out who were the rulers of Numenor, that kind of thing. So you can just sort of just take your pick about a thing that you're interested in. And one of them includes the description of what Saruman was hunting for the ring. And so he was hunting for the ring, and he very nearly found it. He found, it would appear, Isildur's body in the Anduin River, where it had been preserved all that time. He came too late to find the ring itself. The ring, Gollum had got the ring, but he found Isildur's body, which just kind of shows how close Saruman came. And then we get Tolkien writes these things, the things that they found, the evidence that Saruman had found the body. He says these things, and certainly the Elendilmere, could not have been found unless they had been upon Isildur's body when he sank, because we know from the records that he had those things with him when he died. But if that had been in deep water of strong flow, they would in time have been swept far away. Therefore, Isildur must have fallen not into the deep stream, but into shallow water, no more than shoulder high. Why then, though an age had passed, were there no traces of his bones? Had Saruman found them and scorned them, burned them with dishonour in one of his furnaces? If that were so, it was a shameful deed, but not his worst. So that's what Tolkien himself says, is basically he leaves it in this typical Tolkien. He doesn't actually give us the answers, because his sort of writing conceit was that he was just this professor discovering these ancient manuscripts and passing them on to us. So it's just he doesn't know what happened, and therefore he's just trying to tell us what might have happened. The implication is that yes, Saruman destroyed the body. Probably not in a very good way. We're not told, but if he is looking for the One Ring at this point, Saruman's fall, I did a video on this ages ago, but Saruman's fall wasn't just like he was a good guy, then fell. This was a very slow fall from being a good guy. I mean, he was never perfect, but from being a good guy to being completely on the wrong side. And here, if he's already searching for the One Ring, it's not, he wasn't doing it in collaboration with anyone else. He was at least in the back of his mind thinking, I want that for myself. So he found the body. He probably brought the body back, or I'm sure it wasn't just him personally rooting around in the river. He had his people bring the body back. And then what does he do with the body? They couldn't find the body. He must have destroyed it in some way, and probably not in a good way. Martin S. Hi there, Martin, saying, hello, Robert. Haven't listened to many of live streams in the last month, unfortunately. Been playing Midnight, the latest expansion of World of Warcraft, primarily my protection warrior. Well, I hope you're enjoying it. I'm not really a Warcraft guy. I mean, I have played Warcraft, but yeah, I hope you're enjoying it, and that the expansion is a good one, but it's fantastic to see. Let's go to Elsbeta M. The unbreakable black stone that Orthanc is made of matches the description of the walls of Minas Tirith. Do you think that other Numenorian structures made in the Second Age, like Numinas, Minas Ithil, used similar construction? So this is interesting. I mean, and Tolkien doesn't say. The closest he gets is when you're talking about Minas Tirith. Now, Minas Tirith wasn't just built, as it is, as we imagine it now, that many 7 levels each going in, like beautiful white city. That's not how it was originally. The first wall was the outer wall, which is black, and that is notably strong. And Tolkien does say that it was, and I think the phrase was of like to Orthanc, which is sort of his way, it would appear, of saying it was a bit like Orthanc, but not exactly the same. So the black stone Orthanc is, it's mentioned, it's not just black, but it's kind of like shiny black, wet black. That's the kind of feel that we've got going on there. this is a bit like that, but it's not the same. So the answer seems to be with Minas Tirith. Maybe it's the same kind of magical technology, but just done in a slightly different way. The feel I get is that it's the same kind of idea as the ring wall of Isengard, rather than the Tower of Orthanc itself. They seem to be quite similar. Now, as for the other things you mentioned, and the sort of more broad point, Minas Ithil, which later becomes Minas Morgul, that I think it's different. That seems to be Minas Ithil. We don't get much of a description of what it was like, but we're told that it was white marble, that the moonlight reflected off of it, and it seemed to shine. That's contrasted to when it becomes Minas Morgul, and as Minas Morgul, then it sort of has this kind of green light, dark, moody, mysterious. It's not nice. So the Tolkien gives us the kind of the comparison there, but in its original form, it seems to have been bright and light, which is different to the way that Orthanc is described. And Umanas is the first capital of the Northern Kingdom. We're not given a huge description of it. Again, I think it's entirely possible it might be the same kind of feel, but the way that Orthanc is described is unique. The same kind of magical technology may well have been used in other places, but the way that this is described is another level. This is different, stronger, impervious. There's nothing. The fact that this seems to be impervious to pretty much any attack that anybody can do against it is, you would have thought, would have been described as, used as a description for other things if that were the case. This seems to be the biggest and the best. Katrina V. Before breaking Saruman's staff, Gandalf gave him a chance to change his mind and allegiance. How do you think the story would have changed if Saruman had repented at that time? It's a good question. I had to go back and reread it because Tolkien doesn't use the word repent here. I mean, repentance is through a huge amount of The Lord of the Rings as a concept, but Gandalf doesn't. So this, what we're talking about, is when Gandalf and co, they sort of ride up to Orthanc, and Saruman's up there, and they have this kind of like conversation before Gandalf says, "Saruman, your staff is broken," and before that, Saruman kind of tries to sweet talk Gandalf using the power of his voice. It doesn't work on Gandalf, and then Gandalf says things like, is there anything you want to say? You said a lot earlier. Is there anything you want to unsay? Which is not quite repentance, but it's like he's giving him a chance to sort of like row back a little bit on the "shall we go over and join Sauron's side" kind of thing. So he's giving him a chance to unsay some things. He's also giving him a chance to go free. He says, "If you give me the keys to Orthanc and your staff, you can go. And I'm not going to follow you. You can choose where you go, anywhere you want to go. You can go to Sauron if you want. You can go off somewhere else. All of that is fine." So it's not so much like a call for repentance. I think Gandalf would have been open to repentance, but it was a chance to start again in a different way, if that makes sense. So what would have happened? Well, if there had been true repentance, then I think, given that he's a Maiar, I think he probably would have had to go back to the Undying Lands and face the Valar who'd sent him. I don't think, I mean, that was ever really on the cards. But that would be probably what true repentance would be, because he had been betraying not just people around him, but he'd been betraying the charge that he'd had to go to Middle Earth and be serving the Free Peoples. So that would be that. If he did, however, just accept Gandalf's offer, handed over his staff, handed over the keys, I think it probably would have ended quite similarly. I don't actually, because when you try and work through what is it? Is Gandalf now has taken over his power and authority as the head of the Order of the Astari. He's got his staff. Perhaps Gandalf even then would break his staff, take away his power. Saruman would be in the same situation he was just actually not that much longer later, when Treebeard lets him go. He would be in the same situation. Now, would he go to Sauron, which is a thing that Gandalf suggests he might want to do? I think almost certainly not. Sauron knows that Saruman double-crossed him, and Saruman will know that Sauron knows. So why would he go there? I think that's a no-no. So where does he go? Well, he goes somewhere where he can re-establish himself in some way. Where has he established himself in some way already? The Shire. He's got all of his ruffians are up there, and he's probably heard a little bit about what's been going on. And I think he would head up there anyway. So my take is that this is one of those things that even if Saruman had accepted Gandalf's offer, it wouldn't really have affected the story all that much. He would have got to the Shire a bit earlier. The Sackville Baggins would have been kicked out, and Sharky would have taken over a bit earlier. But that's pretty much it. Everything else would have carried on in the same vein. So a quick flick through the chat. Martin S. asking, what would it take to break into Orthanc by brute force? The Ents, Gandalf the White, and the Nazgul were not enough. What about Sauron? The Valar must work at least. Well, yes. So I think if the Valar decided to get rid of it, they could get rid of it. If Eru wanted to, he could. What seems reasonably clear is, so the Ents definitely can't, as you say. The Nazgul were made to wait outside. They couldn't kind of break in. The implication is that Gandalf either couldn't or didn't want to expend all his power doing so. So what would it take? I kind of imagine the same kind of thing that happened when Sauron was kicked out of Dol Guldur. And they kind of did. I quite like it. In my mind, I don't know whether it was actually like that. In Tolkien's mind, in my mind, it's pretty much as they kind of showed it in the Hobbit film, where you get all of the powerful good guys going in there. You get Galadriel, you get Gandalf, Radagast and Elrond. I think they had Radagast there. Elrond, Saruman was there as well. They're all there using all of their power. That, I think, perhaps could have done it. Galadriel, we know she had the power in Dol Guldur itself after the War of the Ring. She could tear down the walls with her power. So I think probably all of them together could do it, but it would take a lot of effort. Let's go to question from Katrina V, saying, at the Council of Elrond, Gandalf says it was by the devices of Saruman that we drove Sauron from Dol Guldur. What I was just talking about. Is there any indication elsewhere what Gandalf means by devices? Well, if you kind of take a look through the way he uses this, devices he usually uses in one of two ways. Either as a sort of three ways, kind of like an insignia or something. Here's the device of Gondor, or the device of Rohan, a horse, that kind of thing. Or a device, as in, we might use the word device, like a created thing. But the third way, which I think is what we've got here, is the kind of like the um, kind of plans, tactics, schemes. The implication is that Saruman, when they took on Sauron at Dol Guldur, Saruman was the one who came up with the plan of attack. He was the one who figured out how do we do this? How do we actually manage to get him out? He's gaining power. He's surrounded by a whole load of his. He's in a castle surrounded by a whole load of his forces. How do we do this? So, although Tolkien doesn't give us the details, it's Saruman was in charge of the planning for that. He's the person who decided how they're going to do it, and the implication there is that if he therefore is in charge of it, then he can guide the outcome. To what extent was he okay with Sauron having fled rather than being destroyed? To what extent was he okay with the idea that they didn't actually at that time destroy Dol Guldur, so it could be reused? What if he's in charge of the plans? Then you have to look at the outcomes and go, is that what he wanted? Okay, Ranabe Mitra saying, I wanted your personal headcanon around the history of black stones in Middle-earth. From Eol, the Dark Elf with Anglachel and Anguirel, to the Stone of Erech, to Orthanc itself. How did the first Edain and the Numenorians get access to this black stone? Fascinating question. There is quite a lot of kind of magical black stone dotted around here. This is, for those who are fans of A Song of Ice and Fire, there's a lot over in George R. R. Martin's world as well. And I suspect that there will have been some kind of inspiration. We talk over there often about like oily black stone being kind of this kind of magical thing going on. And then the fused black stone, and that there's a lot of ideas there that feel like they echo a lot of Tolkien's ideas here. So what is going on? Well, in George R. R. Martin's world, I did a video on the Blackstone where I kind of came to the conclusion that we often too much just think about, oh, it's black stone, without actually trying to get into what type of black stone is. And he had several different types of black stone. There's just simple basalt. Some stone happens to be black. There's this kind of fused black stone. There's the oily black stone. And these things seem to be slightly different. Here with Tolkien, again, I would argue that is sort of the case. So we get Eol the Dark Elf forging two swords, Anglachel and Anguirel. Now, that's way back in the First Age. So what's going on there? This came from an iron meteorite, we're told. So technically, we're not talking stone. We might think of like a meteorite as being like this big stone thing, clumped like that. The way that it's kind of described is that it was an iron, a stone from the skies, made out of iron, and that iron was used in order to make a couple of stones, and they were black. So that feels different to the black stone we have at, say, Orthanc, which is properly stone, not metal. Then we have the Stone of Erech, which is a mystery. Some point I will do a video on it. It didn't appear really in the films, but this was, if you go back, this is connected in with the Oathbreakers, the Dead Men of Dunharrow. If you remember, Aragorn goes through the paths of the dead, finds all of the ghostly people, the army, and sort of leads them out. And he says, I know you broke your oath to my ancestor Isildur, but you can now fulfill your oath by following me. And in the films, it's just like, and so they sort of just charge out the other side, fulfill their oath, and that's it. In the books, as you would expect, Tolkien's got extra layers going on here. And the oath that they swore all the way back then was on this massive stone, black stone, a sphere, buried half into the ground, and it's the height of a man above ground. So it's like twice the height of man in diameter, really. And then when Aragorn kind of leads the army of the dead out, they march to there so that they can symbolically reenact this moment and then head on from there. So that's where they swore their fealty and swore that they would follow Isildur to fight Sauron. And this is where Aragorn symbolically says, now follow me and I will consider your oaths fulfilled. That stone, we're told, was brought from Numenor, which feels like an explanation, but then you start to think about it. If this is a black stone that is 12 feet high, once you've sort of dug it out of the ground, 4 meters or whatever, maybe nearly, that kind of thing would have weighed a huge amount. And how did you get it up there onto the top of the hill? There's a whole load of questions surrounding that. How did you get it on? Was it just sitting on a boat? Didn't sink the boat? We do not know. So there's a whole load there. And did it come from Numenor, or was it given to Numenor in some way? That's a bit of a mystery. So my take there, that feels a bit like it might be connected a bit with Orthanc there, because this is clearly some sort of a symbolically important and in some ways magical stone, because the oaths sworn there, they had a real impact. What became known as the Dead Men of Dunharrow, the Oathbreakers, their spirits stayed because they could not leave, because they had not fulfilled their oath. So that is a kind of like a magical thing. So my kind of feel is that this is a connection back again to Numenor. Now, at the risk of sort of going down the very Tolkien route of sort of saying, well, this is Numenor were just really cool at doing stuff. They could do this kind of magical technology. That does seem to be how he left it. And if you go into kind of his deeper writings, then on Numenor, they weren't fully published, so perhaps he would have changed his mind. But even you get Numenorians effectively creating flying ships. So they've got some kind of like magical levitational kind of thing going on, which perhaps explains how you can get this massive black stone across the ocean. The answer is that Tolkien left it mysterious. But there are different, and it might be the same kind of basic magical technology, but there are different types. And the outer wall of Minas Tirith seems to be a big, strong black wall as well. Feels a bit like the outer wall of Isengard. But the other element that I'd kind of add to that is that there is this. I mean, it's hard to call it a trope, but within high fantasy, there is this idea that magic comes from above in some way. Meteors and meteorites and things like that can hail presage magical stuff. So when you get a meteorite which creates, magical weapons, and when you get a huge tower that apparently Saruman at the top of it he used to be stargazing from, it's all the connection with up there. It's the connection with the sky and magic coming in some way from above, which is, it's a feel that Tolkien kind of is keying into here, rather than an explanation of magic. Agreed, Weirwood. Tutankhamun had a meteorite knife. That is a good fact. Thank you. I'm glad I've learned that one. And let's go to a question from Windfola saying, "Good evening, Robert. I'm a brand new Patreon supporter of your channel. I want to tell you how much I enjoy your Lord of the Rings videos." Well, thank you and welcome. This is one of the benefits of being a patron, is you get priority questions on these live streams. So thank you again, patrons. I can't do what I do without your support. And while I'm saying thank you, moderators, I can see you there just in the chat right now. I can see Carl Karsnark, Stephanie Frederick, Greet Weirwood. There may be some more who I can't see immediately, but some fantastic people there. Could you, if you are there watching live in the chat, could you just share them a little bit of love, because they do a fantastic job. And last bit of little notices, if you are watching this over on Facebook, hi, or X, hello to you too. I'm mostly answering questions here from YouTube, but I'll see whether we can expand that out onto those other platforms at some point as well. But Windfola saying, my question on Orthanc is this: how defensible was this complex? In the movies, we see a surrounding wall. Is that accurate? What was the size of the Orc or Uruk army at Isengard? So hopefully I've kind of explained the wall itself. But I do have a quote. It's always good to have a quote with Tolkien. If it helps you kind of visualize it, this is how Tolkien says it. A great ring wall of stone, like towering cliffs, stood out from the shelter of the mountainside, from which it ran and then returned again. One entrance only was there made in it. A great arch delved in the southern wall. Here, through the black rock, a long tunnel had been hewn, closed at either end with mighty doors of iron. They were so wrought and poised upon their huge hinges, posts of steel driven into the living stone, that when unbarred, they could be moved with a light thrust of the arms noiselessly. One who passed in and came at length out of the echoing tunnel beheld a plain, a great circle, somewhat hollowed like a vast shallow bowl. A mile it measured from rim to rim. So that's the description. And Tolkien emphasizes a few things here in terms of its kind of defendability. The first is the height of the wall, like towering cliffs. And unlike what I've got behind me, it's not just a whole ring. This is kind of nestled against the mountains. So we've got the Misty Mountains at the bottom of the Misty Mountains. And so the ring wall comes out from the mountainside, goes to a big circle, and then joins the mountainside at another end. So it feels like a sort of towering cliffs that just keep on going on. You would not be able to see inside. No one would be able to see what's going on. So, which is how Saruman could be building up his army all that time. So that's the first thing he emphasizes, is the height. And the second thing is the depth of this. Now, there's only one way through, which is this entrance. And it said a long tunnel had been hewn. And then it said, one who passed in and came at length out of the echoing tunnel. So he's twice emphasizing this is a long tunnel. At length, you're passing through it for some time before you go through to the other side. The clear implication is that this isn't just like a wall like this. It's not just a wall that you could knock over. This is basically like a massive round hill that you have to find a way through. So was it defendable? Yeah, absolutely. The key was getting through that tunnel, which was possible, though it did have these great iron gates at either end. So that's the outer. I mean, it's sort of. It's not exactly the same, but sort of the same idea as the kind of the modern Bailey Castle, in that you get a classic castle design. You get this kind of the outer wall, and then you get sort of this inner flatter area, and then you get your keep. Now, on the classic Motte and Bailey, then you have a motte, a mountain, a small hill on which the keep is. But here you don't have that. You just have Orthanc, which just goes up, and it sort of has it in that there's steps. I think there's 27, I think, steps going up before you get to the door. So the door itself is raised above. So even if you're then coming at it on that level, the entrance to it, to Orthanc, is above you. So that's the kind of feel you've got. And obviously that Orthanc we've already covered. It would be pretty hard to do any damage to Orthanc. So is it defendable? The whole place is defendable. You would probably need quite a few people to defend it. But then the tower itself is immensely strong. You also asked the size of Saruman's army. I did a whole video, if you're interested more broadly, called something like How Big Are the Armies in Middle-earth? But the short answer is about 10,000. That's the size of the army that Saruman had managed to build. And we know this because the hobbits kind of count them out when they're going out. I think it's Merry who reports on this, and he says he thought they're about 10,000. So Ranabea Mitra saying, related to your video on Tolkien's Seventh Age of Middle-earth, which I shall just pause for a moment just to explain. If you've not seen that video, we know about the ages of Middle-earth. We've got the First Age, Second Age, Third Age, Fourth Age. The main stories we know, the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, happen at the end of the Third Age. The Rings of Power stuff happens in the Second Age. The First Age is a lot of what is the Silmarillion's about. But after the Third Age, we then get the Fourth Age, which is after the War of the Ring, and then the magic is starting to go. We get the Dominion of Man, we're told. So the elves are all heading off over to Valinor. The dwarves are locking the doors and mining deeper and deeper. The orcs are largely gone. The dragons are largely gone. So it's like the magic is slowly seeping out, and now we're in the Dominion of Man. Tolkien speculated a few different times about the idea that Fourth Age wasn't the last age. There were more ages. And at one point, he kind of basically said, we're now in the Seventh Age, which kind of implies that this is the same world. And Tolkien, but you can see a video, you can play this on YouTube, a clip from an interview he gave. If you've never seen sort of Tolkien being interviewed, then he's exactly as you would expect him to be, very kind of erudite, but he's just explaining this. Somebody's coming in and sort of asking him these questions, and he's kind of explaining the last 50 years of his developed imagination or something. And he was asked the simple question, is this our Earth, but like in a different age? And he says, yes, but it's in a different age of imagination, which I think is a wondrous phrase. And what he's basically saying is that, yes, this is our world, but this created universe that he's got, the stories that we've got, they inhabit the same kind of concept as the mythologies that we have handed down from various other places, from the Norse mythologies and Greek mythologies, etc., etc., etc. And this inhabits that same kind of idea, is that this is the same world, but in a different era of imagination. Things operate differently. The geography might be slightly different, that kind of thing. So that was what that video was about. And Ranabea goes on to say, do you believe Orthanc still exists in the Seventh Age? Do you believe the Dominion of Man and the loss of knowledge from elder days will result in the falling of Orthanc over time? Or is this magic of the Black Stone similar to George R. R. Martin's Black Stone, which can easily last 7 to 8 millennia? So I see no indication that Orthanc fell. Tolkien never seems to imply that um, after the War of the Ring, that it's reused. They're making putting it back to use once more. And unlike many of the magical things in the Second Age, they were connected in some way to Sauron. So the Rings of Power, once the One Ring has been destroyed, the 3 Elven Rings of Power, they've lost their power. Then obviously the orcs. Tolkien has that fantastic little passage describing what happens to the orcs after Sauron dies, because they're kind of like dependent on him in many ways, particularly those who are close to Mordor. And so they just like run scattering around. Some throw them into chasms, themselves into chasms of the ground. Some turn on each other, that kind of thing. So a lot of the magical things in the world are connected in with Sauron. Orthanc isn't. Orthanc is a construction which just stays there. Once knowledge of how it was constructed has gone, doesn't make a difference. It's been made now. It's there. So it's not going to disappear, but it is in this different age of imagination. So it existed then. It does not exist now. There is no author. We can't go and visit Orthanc here today, but it did not, as far as I can tell, there's no hint that Tolkien thought it ever destroyed. Let's go to Robin Thomas saying, how does anyone get up or down from the top of Orthanc? In the movie, it's always shown as an empty platform with no staircase. Yeah, it is. And this is one of those things where Peter Jackson took liberties, many good liberties, but the whole wizard battle that was made up. That didn't happen in the book, and so the spinning Gandalf and all that going up, that didn't happen. In fact, it all seems it's kind of like gentlemanly. The two of them, Saruman and Gandalf, they have their discussion. It does get a little bit heated, but then Saruman basically says, "So you're gonna have to stay here. I can't let you go." And then we read this: "They took me, and they set me alone on the pinnacle of Orthanc, in the place where Saruman was accustomed to watch the stars. There is no descent, save by a narrow stair of many thousand steps, and the valley below seems far away." So the short answer, and sometimes we can just give short answers to these things, the short answer is, in the books, there is a stairway with many thousands of stairs. Small and narrow one, but there is a stairway. It just looked cooler, I guess, on screen, or at least Peter Jackson thought it looked cooler for it not to be the case there. Then let's go to Simran Singh saying 2 questions. How did Saruman create his Uruk-hai at Orthanc? And also, the Palantir often have special links, e.g. the stones of Minas Anor and Ithil. Was the Orthanc stone specifically linked to any of the others? Well, I will answer the second one first. The Orthanc stone was not, at this moment in time, it was not particularly linked. It was the 4 southern stones, the Gondorian stones, were all sort of linked together, but into the central Osgiliath stone. So there was a link from the Orthanc stone to the Osgiliath stone, but the Osgiliath stone got lost. It was effectively destroyed, lost somewhere in the depths of the Anduin River. And when we're saying, then just to clarify, because this has come up before, the Anduin River here is massive. It's hugely wide. It's hugely deep. It's hugely fast running. This wasn't something they could just go and dredge and try and get out. If you imagine the biggest river that you know, it's probably that big. And Osgiliath is near the estuary of that river. So at the time of the Lord of the Rings, then there is no specific link. And indeed, we're told that the Orthanc stone, Tolkien doesn't use this exactly, this phrase, but it wasn't really working very well. Because it had lost its link to the Osgiliath stone, it took Saruman a little while to kind of, he'd look through it, and he could see things not that very far off, and he couldn't see things, very clearly. And Gandalf says, I'm sure he still got really good use out of it. I'm sure he discovered a whole load of really important things. But it was only when he started looking towards Mordor, and that's when Sauron, using the Palantir, the one that he stole from Minas Ithil, that's when they made that connection. But this does kind of explain why, because Tolkien does this. It's one of these kind of things that you don't realize could have been a plot hole until you start thinking about it. If Saruman is hunting for the One Ring, and he's got this magical seeing stone, and the way that they work was that you kind of look through them, and it's more like a telescope. It's not like a crystal ball, the way you go, tell me the future. That wasn't the way that these worked. They're like a magical telescope that you could look through over a huge amount of distance, and even back through time. And if he is looking for the One Ring, and he knows where Isildur was last seen, then he could look and see what happened. Now, if that's the case, how did he not know that Gollum got the ring? Because he could have trained his eye on that and seen what happened in that space over time. So the answer to that from Tolkien is that one wasn't because the sort of the master, it wasn't quite the master Palantir, but because the central Palantir that he was sort of connected with was gone. That made this one not work really very well, which means that Saruman couldn't find exactly what he was wanting through it. And say, you probably never even thought of that as a plot hole before, but Tolkien obviously identified it, and he made it work. And not just well, here's a little retcon, but there's a reason why this is the case. Let's go to the other bit of the question. How did Saruman create his Uruk-hai at Orthanc? Well, again, this is one of those film versus book things. The way the films kind of showed it was he just kind of made them. And he sort of created them in his kind of Frankensteinish way, and they're in those kind of yucky things, and they kind of break out, and it's almost like he grew them in his laboratory, which again looked really good on the screen. But Tolkien is very clear that whereas the very first orcs, way back in time when Morgoth was making the very first orcs, there may well have been some kind of element of that. He changed his mind a huge amount about how orcs came about and what orcs were. But he was very clear that after that initial creation bit, then multiplied in the fashion of the children of Ilúvatar is the phrase he used, which basically means that when a mummy orc and a daddy orc loved each other very much, etc., 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 which is not the image we often have of orcs, and there's no real big description that Tolkien kind of has, other than sort of mentioning in passing, the female orcs are sort of not on the front line, so we don't really see them, that kind of thing. But yeah, there are baby orcs. Now, if you get these generations of orcs, then you can, if you are an evil mastermind like Sauron or Saruman, then you can interbreed, you can try and change things. And it would appear, with Sauron creating the Uruk-hai, who realized, the orcs are great and all, but they've got some big drawbacks. They're not as strong as perhaps some of the people that I want them to be facing in combat, and also they can't go out in the sunshine. So he set to try to change that, and they're also perhaps not as clever, and so he set to trying to change that. And so through this kind of like interbreeding thing, he created the Uruk-hai. Now, Saruman created he didn't go through many generations of this. He went straight into trying to create these Uruk-hai, it would appear. And what mix happened there? We get speculations, particularly from Treebeard, and Treebeard's speculation is that he mixed orcs and humans, Dunlendings, and that kind of makes sense. That this means that maybe now that they're better able to operate in the daytime, which is why when we meet Saruman's troops out with Merry and Pippin, they are able to be running through the daytime as well. So that's what he did. He didn't have hugely long to be doing this, so he seems to have started with some orcs, and then he's interbreeded them with some humans, and he's created Uruk-hai in some way. There will be some magical elements in this, of course, as well. It's not just a matter of breeding, but that's the basis. That it's not just bringing forth Uruk-hai out of these weird cocoon things. It's that they are multiplying in the manner of the children of Iluvatar. Then Blythe saying they also say they mixed orcs with goblin men. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot going on there, and Carl Karsnock, I'm not going to answer that one. I saw what you wrote there. That is not going to be my next video. So, but as you say, orc breeding is not something I want to know much about, methinks. Yeah, I would agree. It's not something that we wish to dwell on, but this is perhaps why Tolkien didn't dwell on it too much, because why would you? Okay, let's go to a question from Catherine Fursith. Why did the Steward of Gondor, Beren, if memory serves me right, yes it was, give the keys to Orthanc to Saruman? Was it strategic, seeing him as an ally, just to get someone to take the strategic position, or something else? Yeah, so I sort of answered some of this before, but let me summarize. Let's start with why Saruman would want this, because he was the person who suggested it. He wanted this because he'd spent a lot of time out in the east, and then he's all come back to the west, and his mind is increasingly turning to ring magic, and his mind was increasingly turning away from enjoying the academic study of making rings of power and wanting to possess rings of power. And for that, he needed a home base. So this makes sense. This is a home base where he could have secrecy. We've got this, we've already talked about cliff-like walls going around Isengard, and this tower in the middle of Orthanc that no one could get in. So that's perfect from the first standpoint that he could just do his own research in peace. Secondly, this is close to where the One Ring was last seen. In the grand scheme of Middle Earth, the distance from Isengard to the Gladden Fields is not that far. And we know that he sent search parties out to try and find things, and his best guess, everyone's best guess, was that it was wherever Isildur had died. So he was searching there. Now, he told the White Council, "Oh, it can't be there," because by now the river would have washed it away. But he clearly didn't. That was just cover. He clearly thought it was still there. And he was playing this game. He was playing this game with the presence of Sauron, in that to start with, he was quite happy for Sauron to be close by in Dol Guldur. Again, relatively close in the grand scheme of things in Middle-earth. Dol Guldur is relatively close to Isengard, because he thought that the presence of Sauron might kind of bring the One Ring out, and then he could be the prime position. So close to there. And then thirdly, he thought there's a Palantir there. And with the Palantir, as Gandalf kind of says, I'm sure it wasn't working very well, but I'm sure he still managed to discover a whole lot of things that he wanted to discover. In his mind, probably, if he could master how this Palantir worked, then what he could do is he could look at Isildur way back in time, track his journey, see what happened to the One Ring, and then go there and get it. And he could also be tracking what's going on elsewhere in the world. And this would, if he's already starting to be thinking about conquering the world himself, this gives him a huge strategic advantage. So, three good reasons why Saruman would want it. Why would the Gondorians want it? Well, first of all, they don't care about it anymore. It's a long way away from Gondor. This used to be part of wider Gondor, but they've now given Rohan to the Rohirrim, and then that's on the far side of there. So it's not like it's part of their landmass anymore. It's a tower, yes, it's a cool tower, but they've got other priorities. They've got priorities thinking about what's going on in Mordor. They don't want to be holding a random tower that's of no strategic advantage to them. So there's that element, and then there's also the element of this should help the Rohirrim, in that Saruman's a good guy, and he's powerful, and he should be able to. This is a stronghold built on the western border where the Dunlendings had been coming through before. He can help hold against the Dunlendings, and then thirdly, he's a good guy point is valid in and of itself. This is the leader of the White Council. This is somebody who is beyond reproach. Nobody thought he was. We now think of, it's Saruman. He's a bad guy. At the time, no. Who would think that? He was very mysterious. People probably didn't know huge amounts about him, but nobody thought he was evil. So that's why Gondor was happy to give it up, because they'd forgotten that the Palantir was there, and it was miles away. It's on the other side of somebody else's territory. It's like having some kind of overseas territory that there's no real advantage for you anymore. There's no economic advantage of them having it. There's no strategic advantage, because Rohan are there defending that border. Why on earth would they keep it? There's no advantage to them, and it helps out their allies. And hey, Saruman seems like a good guy. So that's why it was one of those things. We when we wonder why, it's because often we're looking at things from a perspective of what happened in the Lord of the Rings. When you're thinking about what the situation was at the time, it actually makes complete sense. Matthew Ryan. Are there any other notable or named tenants of Orthanc? Um, not specifically, actually. No. I'm struggling to remember one of the captains there when Gondor was kind of like half interested in having it. One of the captains was kind of known as kind of like a um kind of legendary captain, but I don't think we got his name. Um, and then the other bit, which is like generally relevant, is that just before we get to the whole Helm Hammerhand War of the Rohirrim story, the Dunlendings, some of them are based there. Reflective rambling, picking up a question for Ewan Wiseman. Thank you. I love it when people do this, picking up questions for other people. Saying first time asking, long time member. Well, fantastic. Great. And I love it that you picked this one up, reflective rambling, and thank you for your first question. Love every subject you discuss. Oh, thank you. You also have helped my daughter find her voice and her prenomum. I probably mispronounced that, but for finding her voice, that I feel honoured. Yeah, that so it's one of the great joys of doing this is I sit here just it's literally just this is my front room and here's my laptop and I'm just talking to my laptop. There's nobody else around me, and every now and then I find out that me doing this, my love for and enthusiasm for these books, helps and impacts on people's lives, and that really touches me. So thank you very much. Do send my love on to your daughter as well. And reflective rambling, picking up a question for Ranabe Mitra said, could Freka have originally been used as a pawn by Saruman to trigger Helm and the Rohirrim eventually to gain the keys after the war? Wow. Okay, so this is back to the War of the Rohirrim idea. So the beginning part of all of this is so Helm was the king of Rohan at the time, and then we get this heated discussion, let's put it that way. He did not wish to. The Dunlendings were there. He doesn't come across well, I have to say, Helmand, were there and basically wanting to marry into the royal family, and he was having none of it. Took him outside. He was known as Helm Hammerhand. He one punched him, and the Dunlendings run off. Freka is there. He's the person who was potentially going to be marrying into the family, and lo and behold, he comes back and invades. And the story of Helm Hammerhand, the legend is that he retreats back to the Hornburg and survives there with his people for much longer than anyone could imagine, while this terrible winter is blowing outside. And that's why they call it Helm's Deep, because it's him who led this resistance. But the question is, within that context, could Saruman have been playing events behind the scenes, pulling some strings? Could he have been pushing the Dunlendings to be provoking this to so that after all the cards had fallen, he could turn up and say, well, look, I could help out looking after this. I could stay in Orthanc. What do you think? I mean, I wouldn't put it past Saruman. It does kind of require you to assume that he knew how this was all going to pan out, because the story that we have, and it's only 2 or 3 pages that Tolkien wrote about this, but the story that we have does seem to imply this was quite a close run thing. Rohan could have been wiped off of the map. Edoras falls. It's only Helm Hammerhand who's kind of like holding on this last gasp defense. So you'd have to assume that Saruman expected Rohan to survive, but that was not always looking likely. So could he have? Yes. Do I think he did? Probably no. I think it was just opportunism. And also a question from Ranabe Mitra. Oh, just a shout out for Reflective Rambling, who is doing a fantastic bit of work. Thank you very much. Carl Kosnock, just a completely changing world, saying Rohan Weber is in the next Dunk and Egg. I believe. I hope they cast someone awesome. They have cast someone who looks perfect. I've seen her in something. I can't remember her name, but she, looks very good for it. And let's go to James Perkins with a broad question actually we've got about 3 or 4 more questions here from my patrons, so I will come over to the chat as well. Don't worry. A broad question that narrows to a topical one. It's pretty clear that elves and Maiar of Arda have the ability to use magic, no matter what the elves say. But aside from Bjorn being under no enchantment but his own, and the hobbits having the ordinary everyday sort that helps them disappear quietly and quickly, the men of Arda seem to be a fairly non-magical race. It would appear that nearly anyone can utilize magical items, the magic rings, the glowing elven swords, etc., but I can't recall men ever utilizing magic of their own merits. Even the several Nazgul who are purported to have had great magical powers before fading into wraiths are not mentioned as having become great sorcerers until after accepting the rings of power. Are there any examples of the magic of men that I am overlooking? You also asked about the black stone, which I think I've probably answered previously, so I hope you think that's covered. So, as always, we start with Tolkien had a very soft magic system, so he never fully explained how this kind of magical thing worked. Yes, the elves are magical, but they do not consider it to be magical. That's just what they do. I would also agree that humans are not in this world are not innately magical. So humans as a whole, not like dragons that are magical beings, or as you say, Maiar or the elves. That humans are not by default. We're not expecting a random human to be magical in any way, either as a part of their nature or because they've sort of learned something. Yes, being able to wield magical items, that doesn't seem to be a kind of a race specific thing. If a human had a ring of power or a magical sword, they could use that much like any other race, although Gandalf does kind of like more than hint that some things are more dangerous for humans than they might be for other more magical beings. For example, Bilbo's ring. He thinks it's just a sort of a lesser ring, a minor ring, but he says, in his view, even they are dangerous for the normals, non-elves and the like. So that's the overall context. But it is clear that humans can learn magic. In a sense, it's not that humans are unable to do anything that is magic. In particular, we get this. We talked a bit ago about Numenor and this kind of magical technology. They certainly seem to, back in the time of Numenor, they certainly seem to be able to create magical-ish kinds of things. Orthanc that we're talking about here, that was made by the Numenorians, and that is in its way quite magical. Certainly they've created this impervious material, so there's definitely something going on there. As perhaps a more specific example, think of what we often call the daggers of Westerness, the swords, although to normal humans they weren't really swords, they were more daggers, that the hobbits get. That they find them in the Barrow Downs, and Merry carries his all the way through the adventure and uses it to be stabbing the Witch King. Now, after this, Tolkien says this. He says, "So passed the sword of the Barrow Downs, work of Westerness. But glad would he have been to know its fate, who wrought it slowly long ago in the North Kingdom, when the Dunedain were young. And chief among their foes was the dread realm of Angmar and its sorcerer king. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will." So this is very clearly a magical weapon. It is a magical weapon that has a very particular skill and spell wrought into it, which is to kill the undead, to kill a wraith, or in the way that Tolkien writes it, which is obviously a lot more eloquent than me, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. So it's like the what is holding the wraith here on this mortal plane that could sever it. So again, I did a video if you want more details on this, but very broadly speaking, the way that Tolkien seems to be explaining what happened with the Witch King, Merry stabs away at the back of the leg with the magical sword. That breaks this link between, holding the spirit, the soul of the wraith to this physical plane that enables Eowyn to kill it. So that's what sort of at a very high level was going on there. And that was a magical sword created by humans. But there's more. If you start digging through, it's not just that humanity can create magical things, can craft magical things. We also get, I mean, you talk about the Nazgul, and some of them, we're told, became mighty sorcerers. Yes, after they got the rings of power, but they are still human. They were still human at that point. They had not become wraiths. So clearly there was the ability there. The rings of power seem to exacerbate, multiply their abilities rather than give them particularly new ones. So these were people who had some innate ability that just got made greater. But we also have a very specific example. We have the Mouth of Sauron. Now, you'll remember the Mouth of Sauron near the very end of the film. He kind of like trotting out of Mordor on his horse, and he has this sort of bit of banter with Aragorn and Gandalf. And Tolkien, as he does sometimes, he just kind of like zooms out for a moment and explains who this guy is, what's going on, and he gives a little bit about his past, and it's very clear he was a human, and then he sort of like rose to great power within Sauron's empire. And one phrase that's in there is that he learned great sorcery. So this was a human who learned great sorcery. He learned magic. So humans can craft magical things. They can learn magic. And then thirdly, some humans are magical in a way. It's very clear that some of this comes down through the line from Numenor. Aragorn has healing hands. He's healing powers, which seems to be, again, Tolkien's very vague on the details here. He seems to be a skilled healer, but also there seems to be some kind of magical element to what he is doing. And his grandmother, we're told, had the gift of foresight. So humans can. is the short answer here. The headline, you're 100% right. Humanity in Tolkien's world, generally speaking, are not magical. They're not magical creatures. They're not magical beings. Your average human, the vast majority of humans, cannot do anything magical in any way. Humanity is, however, capable of it, crafting magical things, learning magic. If they devote themselves to it, they can learn magic. And some have got a magical inheritance, which comes from Numenor. So, I mean, there's kind of hints with other characters like Denethor as well, but it's definitely there, strongly hinted with Aragorn, and definitely confirmed with his grandmother. Let's go to Ranabir Mitra. So we've kind of moved on now. We've got a couple of other random more Lord of the Rings questions, but not specifically about Orthanc stuff. Ranabir Mitra saying, or asking if I could share my full feelings on the new Colbert-Jackson movie. What do you think of the film? I feel it's going to be different and fluctuating in tone in comparison to the original Fellowship movie. Famously, I remember Tolkien writing in a letter about the sequel to The Hobbit. It is these first 10 chapters which were very Hobbit-esque in tone, but then the sudden change in tone in the Barrowlands moving forward. Also, adapting Tom Bombadil won't be easy. Will we get a point of view scene from the fantastic Mr. Fox? So there's a lot there. In case you missed that, I talked about this a bit last week. There was an announcement. It was time for Tolkien Reading Day, which was a week ago, from Peter Jackson, that the second of the films, we know the first film that is being made or about to be made, The Hunt for Gollum, Andy Serkis directing it. We've had various bits of casting news about that, and that will start filming this year with a view to December next year being released. But we were told from quite early on that there were a couple of films here that they were working on, with potential for more. But there were two, and we've found out what the second one of these is. And the headline that everybody went with, because it was notable, was the fact that one of the writers, there are three writers named, one of the writers was Stephen Colbert, who's an American talk show host, who is generally acknowledged to be a bit of a Tolkien geek. Now, I still don't know. I have not researched this. I have to say, I still don't know what his screenwriting credits might be. Philippa Boyens, who was the kind of the main screenwriter for the original Lord of the Rings films, is also one of those writers. So I'm kind of leaving that element to one side. I will judge the film on its merits, but I think that the point you're making here is a really interesting one, because what the premise is for this is that we're going to go back and revisit chapters, I think it's 3 to 8 of book 1 of the Lord of the Rings, which in the original films they kind of skated over. It has to be said. This was one of the things I've often kind of griped about in a low-key way, which is the beginning parts of this story. They just skipped so much good stuff. The whole conspiracy element, with Fatty Bulger as well, meeting Gildor the elf, going into the old forest, encountering Tom Bombadil, the Barrowlands, all of that stuff. They sort of hugely condensed and hugely left out a lot of it. And I understand why, from the filmmaker's perspective, is that they wanted to push forward quite quickly with the action. And as much as I love Tom Bombadil, he does strike a different note to a lot of the rest of this, that you'd have to kind of explain what on earth is going on. If you're looking for something to get rid of, you can get rid of the Barrow Downs quite easily, which they did. You just have to make another way for them to have those swords. which in the film seems to have been Aragorn saying, "Here, have some swords." But so the idea seems to be that this is going to be set, I think they said, a few years after Frodo had sailed west, and the three remaining hobbits, they sort of go off in this journey, looking back and remembering the first part of their journey. So basically filling in the gaps that the film didn't have. So as a concept, I'm kind of liking the idea that we're going to get bits that were kind of missed out from the films. This also sort of fits the idea of what happens with the hunt for Gollum, which is explained in the Council of Elrond, but they didn't really talk about it. So looked at from that perspective, I'm seeing this as DVD extras. This is the stuff that they didn't include in the actual film, but it did happen, and they're going to slot it in. So that's the kind of big picture. In terms of the tone, I agree completely. This is going to be quite a tough one because the tone shifts a lot. Tolkien he started out, he'd written this, The Hobbit was a children's story, and he was asked to be writing a sequel. And so he kind of starts out in this kind of idea. It's in the Shire, and all is well. There's an unexpected party. And yes, there's a little bit of danger going on there, but as the starting point of this is, it's still quite pleasant, and they meet some elves, and the elves are lovely. Gildor's there, and they get to sit and lie down. And there's this very whimsical moment when we get this. Everyone's favorite random Tolkien thing in the Lord of the Rings is the fox. Go and have a look at it. It's amazing where you get the POV suddenly shift off to this fox who happens to be passing by and thinks, "Huh, this is all rather curious." And then Tolkien says, "Yeah, of course, he was right, but he never found out what was going on." And then he moves on, and it's like, "Are you not going to tell us more about this fox?" And it's very whimsical in the kind of the way that The Hobbit is, as this kind of children's story. And obviously, Tom Bombadil is just a whole lot of fun, very bright, singing songs. That's a very different kind of feel. And then we get the Barrow Downs and everything comes crashing in. Suddenly, you get, actually, this is kind of like low-key horror. They're pulled into these barrows, these ancient graves. The hobbits are laying out there as if they're dead bodies. They're probably going to be sacrificed. It's all going to go terribly wrong. And then they get rescued by Tom Bombadil. But it's very, very dark. So that's the kind of the tonal shift. They've left the Shire now. Things are going to get properly dark. We're not going to suddenly have a fox wandering around. We're not going to always be rescued by Tom Bombadil. We're not going to have Farmer Maggot there as this kind of very happy, friendly presence. In fact, actually, that's one of the things people have sometimes asked me, what do you hope is going to be there? I'd love to see Gildor. I'd love to see a proper Tom Bombadil. But also justice for Farmer Maggot, who is a great character in the books. On the TV show, in the film, then basically he's just like a man chasing after Merry and Pippin with the scythe. He's so much better than that. But how are they going to handle it? It's quite a tough ask, I think. It will be a very different feel, and the challenge, I think, will be how to shift from the whimsical, fun side of things to the, actually, this is kind of dark. I assume that they'll sort of end up in Bree or something like that at sort of the end of it. But that is a tonal shift that Peter Jackson basically just noped out of. He said, I'm not going to do that. And he just instead went with the slowly gathering dark idea, is that they start off there happily going through the cornfields and things like that, bump into Merry and Pippin. Then you get this is all very sinister with the Black Rider. And then on the side of the road, you know the scene. Then you get this kind of chase to the Bucklebury Ferry, and it starts getting darker, and then meet Aragorn, and then that's the increasingly dark. There's a clear trajectory which worked really well within the film. But here, Tolkien doesn't do that. It's all light and happy. Oh, there's a Black Rider. We've now got Gildor. That's fantastic. Oh, there's a fox. That's great. But now we're going to get chased by the Black Riders. We need to evade them. We get Old Man Willow, which is just like a nature work. We're expected with Tolkien. Nature is on your side. Nature here isn't on us. So there's so many different layers to this. So I don't know exactly how they're going to do it. I'm really looking forward to finding out. I'm really looking forward to having this as an extra bit of the film canon. But yeah, it's going to be potentially quite a choppy up and down kind of feel. Jewel Elson gifting a IDG Live membership. Yeah, that's a thing you can do. Thank you very much. That's very generous. Reflective Rambling saying they probably want to keep the franchises separate. I'm so okay if they want to bring in Rings of Power. Bombadil, I love that actor so much. Yeah, he's a great actor. I think you're entirely right with your instinct that the two are staying far apart. We're going to have the Jackson world. I don't know if that's the way of putting it, but the Warner Brothers film universe, and you're going to have the Amazon universe, which I say this from time to time. They do have the rights to make other TV shows in the Tolkien world. I haven't heard that they're going to go ahead with that, but they do, and that was always something in the back of their minds. So we could theoretically have a Rings of Power spin-off. I don't know. Just something to be aware of. If ever I hear anything about that, I will let you know. My instinct is probably not now, but who knows? And for Bucky Underbelly saying Matt Berry as Tom Bombadil, I mean that would work wonderfully. Yeah, I'm now imagining that, and I've got a big smile on my face. I think that would work very well. Actually, the chat while we're there, fancast Tom Bombadil. I'm very much on the Matt Berry bandwagon, but if there's somebody else there that you think would work very well for it, let me know. I've got one more question here from Skagzilla saying, "Hi Robert, I hope you're having a good week. Random question. I was wondering if you ever listened to the BBC Lord of the Rings radio drama from the 80s, or the Martin Shaw Hobbit reading. They were my first introduction to the Lord of the Rings world, listening to them on cassette tapes on road trips. If you haven't, I would very much recommend." Well, the answer is yes, I have heard both. Martin Shaw reading, excellent. But I will wax lyrical for a moment about the radio drama from the BBC radio drama from, I think it was 1981. It's certainly early 80s. My experience was very similar to yours. This is, I remember going on family holidays, and my dad would put this on. It was made for the radio as, I think it was 26 half-hour episodes, and Brian Sibley was the kind of the main writer behind this, who's been a great servant to the sort of the Tolkien fandom for a while, and the cast is great. It has Ian Holm as Frodo. He, of course, was Bilbo in the Peter Jackson films. Much later, it has Bill Nighy, the actor, not the science guy, as Sam, and Michael Hordern, who was a fantastic actor, as Gandalf, and just a whole cavalcade of excellent British acting talent who were there. And one of the things which works well is it's not just a great production, but it's one of the, in terms of an adaptation, one of, if not the closest adaptation to Tolkien that I've come across. They did move the order around a little bit of some of the sections because the way that Tolkien, you read the book recently, you'll remember, I'm sure, Tolkien kind of separated out the Sam and Frodo bit from the other things. There's kind of like basically half a book, just so that, you know, we were slightly uncertain what was going on there, and so it kind of like we were slightly on tenterhooks. Did they make it? What's going on? But here they don't do that. They kind of like push the bits of the story together. But if you want an idea of how close this is, Christopher Tolkien, who was a critic of almost everything, every adaptation, Christopher Tolkien approved every script. They sent it to him and he ticked it off. He even recorded a pronunciation guide that they used for Tolkien's words. Wherever possible, they word for word used the exact dialogue from the books themselves. It really is wonderful. It's been actually too long since I've listened to it, so I probably should get back to that. But yeah, it's I would say my favourite adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. Right. Peter Muller saying, you're up late, Robert. I am up late. I'm sometimes up even later with these ones. A quick flick through the chat. Vanabir Mitra saying, I can't unsee this, unfortunately. Jack Black for Tom Bombadil. Yeah, the thought did cross my mind. You want somebody with a big personality, which Jack Black does have. So yeah, I absolutely, and loves music. So yeah, absolutely. Samantha Drake saying Matt Berry is perfect. I don't have anyone for Goldberry. Yeah, I don't know about Goldberry, but you'd have to have someone good. 10 years ago, Bilbo Buxton saying 10 years ago, I'd have vouched for Brian Blessed. Brian Blessed would have been amazing. And a couple of other people saying Jack Black. It sounds like there's two big favourites here: Jack Black and Matt Berry. I mean, I think I wouldn't hate either, but I'm very much on the Matt Berry bandwagon now. Paul Whitrock saying, no question, just appreciate the stream. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that so much. And Mark Addy, Bucky Underbelly suggests, yeah, that I think he could probably pull that off. Tommy Then, just showing some appreciation for Paul. Okay, let's. I think with that, I've had all my questions. So, what do I need to be doing? Well, thank yous again, patrons. Thank you. I hugely appreciate all of your support. And if you're here in the chat live, then could you show a bit of love to the moderators who do fantastic? Orlando Mitra, yes, the RSC has announced dates for the Mad King play. That was a thing I was wanting to talk about over in the Song of Ice and Fire world. So the Mad King play, the Turning at Summerhall play, they have announced the dates. It was pretty clear roughly what they were going to be, but I think it's mid-July, something like 15th July through to around the end of September. So it's not a long run. This is going to be at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-upon Avon in central England. Something, I mean, I will probably tweet this out at some point, but something I noticed, I don't know if other people picked up on, is in the sort of the detail, if you sort of go into their sort of explanation about this, and they say we're expecting high demand, etc., 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 and then they say that it will also be a reduced capacity because of the, and I can't remember the exact phrasing they used, but the expanded stage, which fills me with huge joy because I can tell you I've been to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre a few times. It's a big stage. It's a really big stage. It can do some amazing things. They've got a great crew there, but it's a big stage and it's got ways on and off all over the place. If they wish to expand that, get rid of some seats for this. And incidentally, if you go, and I have looked in this nerdy detail, if you go and have a look at their scheduling, they seem to have left a good 2 or 3 weeks of no performances beforehand. They normally leave a few days of no performances, but they're going to do some proper work there. If they're wanting even bigger, I think we're going to get jousting, guys. I think we're going to get jousting on stage. I'm very excited about this. But yes, so it is there. I'm definitely going to be trying my very, very best to be getting tickets, and I will report back on everything that I see there. But also the other thing with that large stage thing, this limits which other theatres could be showing this, because and I don't want to go too far down this route because they could scale it down. So maybe this is just like we'll start with a big bang and then we'll scale it down for later. But I mean, I don't know the capacity of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, but it's got to be over 1,000. I mean, this is a decent sized theatre, and if you've got a big stage, which it has got a big stage, this means that when it goes to London, which apparently is the plan next, and then on to other places, the theatres which could potentially have this will have to be big theatres with big stages and potentially stages which could be even bigger than normal. So, yeah, there are things to work through, but we'll know a bit more about that once we've seen it. Okay, so you distracted me there. They also have a creative team talk at 2 separate events. I'm in it. I'm looking. So I will find this. Is this an actual run or a soft open preview? This is the run. This is the only bit they've announced of the run. This will be a proper opening. It would not surprise me. I've not heard, but it would not surprise me if George R. R. Martin is there for it. It's going to be a proper opening of an event. It's going to be running there for, I don't know what it is, 6-7 weeks, something like that, and then it will transfer somewhere else. This is actually quite standard for the Royal Shakespeare Company, who are based at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. This is actually standard for how they tend to do these things. They will do a production which starts in the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, which, as I say, it's in central England, fantastic place to go, but the heart of Theatreland in the UK is London, in the West End, and so it will, after doing its initial run in Stratford, they will then take it down to a theatre in London. So that's the standard way. For example, I can't remember, a few months ago, I saw Hamlet there, a fantastic production of Hamlet, which had Anton Lesser, who was there. Kyburn was part of it, who did a really good job. And that now is at a theatre in London, with the same kind of set design and probably most of the same cast. So that's the idea. Yes, so this is, it's a proper run. And Firefly, we're going all over the place here now. Yeah, so Firefly, in case you missed this news and you're a Firefly fan, Firefly, you may have seen Nathan Fillion on social media. He was teasing for a little while that something was going on. He just did these very quirky little kind of TikTok-y short videos, going to former castmates on Firefly, and he'd just like knock on their door and they'd answer it, and they just have this weird kind of conversation, and they'd say, "Is it happening?" And he's going, "Oh, it's happening," and it's just that kind of thing. That was all teasing them getting together at some Comic-Con or something. Firefly is returning with a caveat, which is this is going to be returning as an animated adventure. The thing that I'm fascinated by on a kind of a nerdy way, I'm excited that Firefly's back. I love Firefly. It's excellent. Kind of slowly rewatching it now, actually. But the thing which is quite fascinating is that they've got the actors are signed up, they've got writers sorted, they've got the production team all done, all of that bit okay. They haven't got anywhere to show it on yet. They haven't got a streaming service or anyone who's doing it. And this feels like to me, a little bit of an industry breakthrough where suddenly, if you've got enough power and money behind you, and obviously people like Nathan Fillion, Alan Tudyk, that they can pull a few strings. You can make something and then decide where it goes, rather than have a studio or a streaming service commission you to make something, which is a very different kind of business model. So we don't know where it's going to end up, but it's being made. Okay. Brandon Mitchell giving me more information. You've clearly been looking at this. So this is about the stage play. 20th to the 22nd of July, reduced price preview. August the 3rd, pre-show creative team talk. September the 1st, post-show talk with actors and production. August the 26th, recording of the play. Now, recording of the play is, I think, the thing which most people will be most interested in. If it's going to be recorded, the implication is that it's going to be shown somewhere. So that would be pretty amazing. One of these days we'll need you to get off topic and give us a theatre gushing stream, says Reflective Rambling. I can tell you what, if I get the tickets, I'm trying my best. If I get tickets to it, then I will consider it a part of my duty to you to come and gush about what's there. What I'm hoping is that they don't try and make everybody swear to secrecy about what's in it, because that would leave me in a huge moral quandary about what I am allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. But assuming they don't do that, I'll be saying everything with spoiler alerts all over the place. Okay, let's go to yeah, I think that's probably it. So anyway, unless anybody suddenly drops any other bombshells there in the live chat, we will be back next week with another. Let's go back to A Song of Ice and Fire next week. Let's do Arya. We did Sansa last week. Let's do Arya next week. The main videos on the main channel will be back up and running properly. I've got some more plans. I always have big plans for this channel. I've got a few ideas of things I want to be doing. I've got a little bit more time for the next couple of weeks, so we'll see what comes from that. But if you have got to this part of the video and you want to watch more live streams, there is here-ish going to be appearing, if you're watching on YouTube, a link to other live streams that I've done, and appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. That is all for this time. I will be back next week. Take care, everyone. I'll see you then.